Venerable Dean, dear colleagues, and first and foremost, dear students, both returning and incoming. Welcome to this academic year of 2025-2026 here at Yale Divinity School. It might take a time to get accustomed to our marvelous buildings. But it is now time to celebrate this new stage in your life, a new academic year filled with challenges and chances. Well, you might think more challenges this year. However, you might even wonder if you are at the right place at this time, if this is the right time to be at this place. Why, you might think, reading books again in these times, why delving into abstract problems? You might ask, how can I debate scholarly the commandment to love my neighbor while in my neighborhood people fear being displaced from their homes? How can I devote my time to studying the ancient Near East, while right there still hostages are suffering and innocent children are starving, if not being bombed to death? How can I engage in learned discussions about the liberating power of the gospel, while people out there feel trapped in their bodies and in the gender assigned to them at birth, and they do not receive help? How can I learn about the gospel and its message, embracing every nation, every race, and every gender, while I see our reality is so far remote from all these promises? But more broadly, you might wonder if this is really the time for reflection when everything seems to call to action. But as Kohelet says in the Bible, for everything there's a season, and maybe it is a season now for you to reflect upon all these things and upon all these things which might not seem to have anything to do with the reality around. So let's start a little bit with a view into the history of theology and the history of Christianity, just to learn how different things could be seen during the centuries. Not always was the question, why reflection while I feel called to action? But most times the question was put the other way around. Why going to action when you could have time to reflect? There was a story of the New Testament which was widely used to prioritize reflection or contemplation of action. You might know this story. There were these two sisters living near Jerusalem, in the east of Jerusalem, Martha and Mary. This Mary who later on was identified with Mary Magdalene. The Bible doesn't identify her this way, so let her stand as Mary. Martha and Mary, and they received a guest coming to them, young man Jesus, who came into the house. And what do you do as someone hosting a guest whom you are acquainted with? You go to the kitchen, you help, you do something. So Martha, the older sister, did this way. She was working in the kitchen. And so I'm the youngest of three, but nevertheless, I can understand how she felt when she saw her sister sitting in the living room and admiring Jesus. She did nothing, this Mary. She did nothing. And Martha did it all. And so, getting more and more angry, she came to Jesus and told him, why do you let her just sitting here? She could help me. And Mary, please, she addressed her, Mary, please help me. And what did Jesus say? Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. That's a bummer. And this one lasted for centuries, indeed. Both sisters were identified with a certain way of life. Martha, for all the centuries, was seen as the person signifying the active life, the vita activa, while Mary, of course, was seen as the person signifying vita contemplativa, the contemplative life, the reflecting life. And this is the better part. This is the only better part Jesus said. And to a certain degree, we should believe that it is right what Jesus said, even if Martha did not believe in this moment. Not in this sentence, at least. So this story was used to say sometimes, or most times in our life, contemplation and reflection is much more important than action. And I will follow this path a little bit in 3 steps, thinking about why it can be helpful to take a step back from our current situation. In the second step, I will think about how important it can be to learn from others while distancing from yourself and your situation. While in a third step, I will try to integrate both, and those of you who know me will not take it as a surprise that I will take a mystical theologian from the Middle Ages to integrate both ways. So that was enough to have a kind of tangent for the third step, starting with the first step. First, thinking about what it means to step back from the needs of here and now. Sometimes you make the experience you see better some things from distance. I just can invite you to visit our Museum of Arts or going to the MoMA, to the Department of Impressionists, and then you stand right before this painting and you don't see anything. You have to go into distance to see clearer what is on this painting. And sometimes life is like these paintings. You have to go into distance to see clearer, to get things organized. And this might be in particular in a situation in which all around you seems to call for action and seems to be challenging. The title of this presentation today, Theological Existence Today, is taken from a famous essay written by Karl Barth in June 1933, a Swiss man living and teaching in my home country, Germany. In that important year, later on, he would be one of the leading figures of the confessing church in Germany. He wrote in June 1933, a few months after Adolf Hitler had taken over the power. He wrote in a situation in which, back then, people were afraid about democracy. He wrote in a situation when, back then, people did not know if all rights would be preserved. He wrote in a situation in which, back then, he, as a permanent resident of Germany, would stay in Germany or would be expelled. Later on, he would leave Germany by some reasons. So he wrote this essay in a situation of much uncertainty. And he wrote, as I said, Theological Existence Today. The core sentence of this essay is, the decisive thing I have to say today about these worries and problems is simply this, that I'm striving here in Bonn, his university, with my students as before and as if nothing had happened, perhaps in a somewhat heightened tone, but without direct reference to pursue theology and only theology. Pursue theology and only theology, that's a good advice for many situations throughout our lives and throughout our history. Pursuing theology and only theology might mean to sit down at the feet of Jesus Christ, to admire Jesus Christ, and to learn from Jesus Christ as Mary did. It might mean to broaden your view from just looking at Jesus Christ and to see in Jesus Christ your neighbor, and then to look at your neighbor. Pursuing theology and only theology led Karl Barth to write a multi-volume work. Others just took one sentence to say what theology and only theology means. There's this ancient story from the first centuries of Christianity about John the presbyter, the biblical author, whatever he wrote actually in the Bible. When he came to die, he gathered his disciples around him, and he said his last word, "Children, love each other." Maybe if you know this after some years at YDS, that's quite a lot. Children, love each other. There were some other persons in the history of Christianity who were able to say just one sentence so meaningful as this sentence was. It is only a few months ago in January that a bishop in our country put it very simple: have mercy. That's also what children love each other means. Theology, and only theology, follows these simple sentences and follows a certain understanding of yourself as a human being. And now, first time to refer to my beloved mystics, they spoke about detachment, which means taking a step back, not only from your situation, but from yourself. Taking a step back, the German word for it is Gelassenheit, which means let go all what makes you a social person, all what defines your social role. Leave your self-centered thoughts behind. Detach from everything. And then, when being detached in yourself, these mystics said, then you will find what is truly the image of God in your soul. This image of God, as promised in the first book of the Bible, is not the image we give in everyday life in our social roles. This image of God is what is truly in our inner being. That you find God themselves, which means whatever gender a human has, whatever race they have, wherever they come from, whatever their status in our country is, in their inner being, they all are the spitting image of God. Every human shows us how God looks like in their different way. And that's what Mary saw in Jesus. She saw every human being in Jesus, which the other way around means in every human being, we can see Jesus and God themselves. Which leads us to the second step, learning from others. And that's what we mainly do here at YDS, learning from others throughout this cosmos of Christianity, starting with the biblical books where we learn how our mothers and fathers in faith faced God themselves, how they found their way led by God, and how they struggled to find this way as sometimes we struggle to find our way. I could give a multi-hour lecture now about history of Christianity and what you can learn there. I stay tonight with the more simple messages, just reminding of the already mentioned Francis of Assisi, his way to follow Jesus Christ, which is a challenge for every one of us. No one of us lives according to Jesus Christ in the radical way like Francis and the Franciscans did. So we can learn from all these patterns of Christianity. We can learn from all those great thinkers. When I first visited Yale Divinity School, it is 20 years ago, not those 50 years, Mark, you have spent at the institution, but at least I encountered Yale 20 years ago. Someone told me, basically we have two big cults here. It's Karl Barth and Karl Rahner. That's our theology. Something I learned has changed since, at least it has changed that we learned through research and reality that there's no Karl without a Charlotte. And there are many other female theologians. We have to remember there are Dorothees, there are Julians, there are Theresas in history, and some of them at our Divinity school. So there are many other theologians than not only those two cults, which were the heroes back then, 2 decades ago, but all of them, male, female, beyond binary definitions, all of them are people with different backgrounds who can teach us, and the most important teachers are your fellow students. Your fellow students who bring with them their different backgrounds from other denominations, and as we just heard in the introduction, from many countries of this world. And as someone who, as you heard, comes from another country. Now, teaching here, I can tell you a lot about how different cultures in theology are. Maybe we better do this after 2 or 3 glasses of wine, but there is a lot to talk about. Which also means we always pretend like theology is about one truth, but this one truth, of course, is much too big to be grasped by only one of us. All of us only bring their particular knowledge into all of this, us bring a certain approach into this great diversity, intellectual diversity we have had over decades and centuries in this institution and will continue to have with all these diverse approaches, surrounding someone the knowledge about God. Because this God, as Nicholas of Cusa put it in the 15th century, is a Deus absconditus. He's a hidden God whom we never will approach, but about whom we only can have what Nicholas of Cusa also phrased, a doctor ignorantia, a learned ignorance. At least a learned one. Ignorance will stay with you over all years you will spend here, but you will get learned more and more, and that helps a lot to follow the path of this, to this hidden God, and to detect in this God all those images of God and of human beings. To quote someone who spoke in this building 8 years ago, James Cone, who said, anytime your empathy, your solidarity is with the little people, you are with the cross. If you identify with the lynchers, then no, you can't understand what's happening. That's how James Cone put this idea of finding God in the human beings and in particular in the sufferings. Now, after thinking about stepping back from our situation, stepping back from ourselves, a short thought, thirdly, how to include reflection and action, and how to bring reflection into action, and how to let action resonate with reflection. The questions I raised there at the beginning didn't find any answer, and they are so basic that I'm afraid they won't find their answers in a few weeks or months. They are still present to all our work. We won't find the answer, but maybe we might find a better and better answer. Maybe our ignorance might be learned and more learned step by step. In a way, as, and now he comes, Meister Eckhart, the mystical preacher in the Middle Ages, put it when he had to preach about Martha and Mary. Then somehow and I can understand it so well, he sympathized with Martha. And he didn't want to say that Mary did everything right. But he said Mary still had to expect to become Martha and then to become the right Mary. A strange sentence, a paradoxical sentence, which means she has to integrate both parts. It is not either the contemplative way or the active way, but it is bringing both together. Only if you act in a reflected way, with reflection, or if you reflect in a way that helps your action, only then you have integrated both parts present in this story and present in the history of Christianity. Mary to become Martha, to become Mary again in a higher level. That's something that could invite me now to think about dialectics in the sense of the German philosopher Hegel, but that's too much for the first day. So I will only conclude shortly, again greeting you as those who returned to the YDS or are here the first time. This indeed is the day to begin your journey at YDS or to continue your journey at YDS, to return to our community. This is a time of reading and reflecting which lies ahead. It is a time of letting your thoughts roam into other worlds, into conceptual labyrinths even. It is a time to pursue theology and only theology. And there will even be moments where you will be lost in this intellectual world. You will fully be Mary then, but only to become Martha. The Mary who is Martha will reflect on action and act with reflection. When both Martha and Mary begin merging within you, then Jesus will say, "You have chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from you." Welcome to YDS.